班农先生呢，刚才我跟他们谈那么多，我特别感兴趣，他想说一下关于台湾问题，大陆持续的对台湾人民威胁进行了蓝金黄。如果真的台湾遭受了更多共产党的威胁，美国会做什么？会不会保护台湾？他们会派兵，或者采取各种可能手段去支持和保护台湾人民吗？
Mr. Bannon, we appreciate our discussion. I would like to ask you a question on Taiwan. As you know, the CCP has been doing a lot of threats to the Taiwanese people. And if there is a further threat to the Taiwanese people, do you think the U.S. will send armies to protect the Taiwanese?
I think you're seeing, look, as a young man, you know, I was in the Pacific Fleet as a naval officer. And I pulled into Taiwan many, many, many times. Right, with my destroyer, with our carrier battle group, with all that. And back in those days, we had a very upfront military and strategic relationship with Taiwan. There's a deep love for the Taiwanese people by people in the United States that have always looked at it as, you know, that's where many freedom-loving people in China left for, right, back in the 1940s and the 1950s. I think Taiwan has tremendous support among the American people. And I think what you're seeing today for your audience in China, I think what you're seeing is that you're seeing a lot more activity of these carrier battle groups. We now have 2 carrier battle groups that are, unlike under Obama and even under Bush, did not go through the Straits of Taiwan and then down to the South China Sea and through the Straits of Malacca. You have active participation now of these carrier battle groups, and they're also going there in what is used to be called under Obama it was safe passage, where they wouldn't have their radars up, they wouldn't have, you know, their fire control radars. Now in these carrier battle groups with all the cruisers and submarines and destroyers that they bring are going through really in a much more aggressive way. That is not aggression against the Chinese people, right? What it's telling is the CCP, right, which is kind of this gangster mob that enslaves the Chinese people. And it's trying to enslave the people, the free people of Hong Kong and Taiwan. What it's saying is that freedom-loving people in the West, right, are your allies, that you have not been forgotten, and that those sailors on those ships basically are working-class people, just like the people in Hong Kong, mainland China, in Taiwan. So yeah, I think people should really pay attention as the economic situation gets worse. Because the incompetence of CCP on the economy, they're going to start to try to have military stuff be more important. Right. And I think the Chinese people have to watch trying to be sold on a potential invasion of Taiwan, right? And I think that is going to be one of the big hot spots in the next 5 or 10 years.
我觉得这个问班农先生啊。这个美国有一个叫 RICO 法案，就是反诈骗与贪污组织法案。我觉得王岐山、孟建柱、孙立军共产党在美国所现在干的事情，完全符合这个特征。我们已经探讨了将近1年多的时间了，最近进展非常大。那么我请问一下班农先生，就是说，入道之路这个基金现在，他认为是如何的用这个RICO 这个法案来对付王岐山和孟建柱、孙立军等中共的盗国集团，帮助中国人民查出来被骗、被黑的钱，他认为可能吗？他怎么看待这个事儿
？Mr. Bannon,
yes, sir.
I understand that there is a RICO law in U.S. That is the Racketeer, Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. So, as you know, like those thieves in China, like Wang Qishan, Meng Jianzhu, Sun Lijun, all these guys, they've been robbing, doing a lot of corruptions in U.S. So, what do you think about how the Rule of Law Foundation could help on using these RICO rules to fix the issues, to make sure that all these peoples are indicted in U.S.
Well, the key to the Rule of Law Fund is that our vision is that the rule of law will eventually become what China's governed by. I think if you set up a set of rules in China and the Chinese people know about it, that China will prosper, it'll be a fair and just society. right? Right now, you clearly don't have the rule of law. The rules are whatever the faction of Xi and Wang Xishan, the CCP, want them to be. And that's why you're having people thrown in prison, people commit suicide, people disappear. It's just not acceptable. The Rule of Law Fund is twofold: to tell those stories and also to do the investigations on the civil side, right? To help, and we call it the 500 that have either disappeared or been destroyed in the last year or so. And so the Rule of Law Fund is very important. That I think we can actually take it to another level. And what I hope we can do in the first year of the Rule of Law Fund is in our investigations with the information we have is to eventually, present to the appropriate authority. RICO is used as a criminal activity by the federal court system and in the Department of Justice. What RICO was used by law enforcement officials to break the mafia, okay? To break the mafia. And I think when you look at, particularly, I take H&A as a case. I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm so proud to have Miles as a partner. Is that what he did on the H&A case, right? To me, he's clearly he exposed racketeering. And what I mean by racketeering is the use of a front organization like H&A, which was used for money laundering, influence peddling, bank fraud, wire fraud. It's a classic example of a criminal enterprise. H&A is a criminal enterprise. And when Miles Kwok called it out on Voice of America, and then we subsequently called it out, they threatened to sue him and tried to sue him, right? And he proved it's all correct. He proved that it was not owned by the people in Hainan. It had been transferred to a couple of trust funds under the control of Wang Xishan, right? That's why all people in China have to understand, all the big Western commercial banks backed away, right? Because of who owned H&A, which they should have known, but they looked the other way because it was convenient to look the other way because they were making money, right? It was Miles Kwok that pointed that out. Then when Goldman Sachs pulled the IPO, right? I worked at Goldman Sachs. Traditional due diligence would have shown you your fiduciary responsibility is to find out who the owners was. It wasn't Miles Kwok's responsibility to find out who the owners of H&A were. It was the banks and the investment banks. This is what you're seeing right now, and this is why I think it falls under a RICO statute. You're seeing a criminal enterprise, which is the senior leadership of the CCP, that run like a criminal enterprise. And what they've done is they've gotten legitimate Western banks in London, in Europe, and the United States, working with them, financing them, taking them public, and all looking the other way, right? Just asking enough questions they can answer to kind of push it down. But as soon as you have essentially a whistleblower like Miles Kwok that says, hey, they're not even owned by who they say they're going to be owned on. And they threaten him with a lawsuit, and it's in the process of that lawsuit. He proves them right. All the rats left the ship. Where's H&A bankers today? Where's Goldman Sachs in the IPO? They all scattered, right? They scattered because you had a truth teller say, hey, to me, that's a classic example. And that's just one, H&A. I think on bond insurance companies is the exact same way. I think you have many, many, many institutions that have been corrupted by the CCP and used as front organizations to, when I say launder money, to take money they steal from the Chinese people and to push that not back into China. It's bad enough they steal it, but not to even reinvest in China. To take that cash and to get it to the West, to get it either to London or to Vancouver, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or particularly New York City, to launder that money here. So they've got their investments safe outside of China, right? And so they can make money on their money here and to use that as influence peddling to buy off politicians, to buy off accounting firms, law firms, and I think many of the media companies. I think that's all got to be investigated. The Rule of Law Fund's going to do what we can do. But look, we're even with $100 million, we're a relatively small thing. But I believe that the more that we expose this, and I will say one thing I was so proud of working with Miles on the press briefing we had right before Thanksgiving here in the United States. The people that saw that came back to me and go, I can't believe this. I can't believe there's so many prominent people in China that have been either committed suicide or died mysteriously or in prison or just simply disappeared, right? I can't believe this. How can there be so many prominent Chinese and nobody's talking about it? People in China have to understand one thing. In the West, it's basically crickets about this. That has not been discussed. And as I use an example, you had one Russian who was poisoned in London, and that's all the tabloids talked about for a month. and that was terrible, but it's one guy. You had Khashoggi, and it's terrible how Khashoggi died, right, in the Turkish consulate, right? Terrible, terrible. But it was global news for 3 weeks. You've had people at much higher levels than Khashoggi or the Russian guy, right? You've had the elite of the elite in China simply disappear, and nobody said anything about it. It is one of the great crimes of the 21st century, and one of the rule of law fund. We intend to bring those stories up. We intend to bring up the stories of the families. We intend to continue investigations here to see who is complicit with these guys.
哎，我觉得班农先生今天可以谈一下，就是说香港这个地方现在被共产党的渗透到了令人发指的程度，对香港人民随便绑架、随便的这个查封资产，然后作为对大陆的威胁，而且大量的渗透间谍、警察执法，破坏了香港的最根本的基础，这个法律。班农先生认为美国接下来会做什么？应该做什么呢？
Mr. Bannon, could you talk a bit on the issues in Hong Kong? Like, as you know, the CCP's penetration to Hong Kong is very serious, and they have been kidnapping people in Hong Kong. They've been sending a lot of spies in Hong Kong. So, what do you think the U.S. government would do on these issues?
You know, when I was a young naval officer, the very first city in China that we pulled into or associated with China on the mainland was Hong Kong. I think that was in 1977. And back in those days, unlike Hong Kong today, the port really had, in particular the Kowloon side, you really had where the cargo ships were, and the Navy vessels really pulled down to the old British, right by, on the Kowloon side, but in the Wan Chai. Right near the Wan Chai is where the fleets pulled in. And so I fell totally in love with Hong Kong from the very first time I went there. I've always said that the most unique people I've ever met in the world are the Hong Kong Chinese. They have a sense of entrepreneurship, a sense of really making do with very little, making something of it. The hustle and bustle of Hong Kong at that time was just incredible. I think today in the world, one of the great tragedies we're seeing is Hong Kong. And here's why. One of my heroes has always been Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul and Margaret Thatcher, because those three people came together really to destroy the Soviet Union. But I think in her career, and I've always said this, I think the biggest single mistake she made was the turnover of Hong Kong. And the reason was, it's not that Hong Kong should at not one time be reunited to China. That's not the issue. But, in making a deal and thinking about further down the road, you could have, the people she made a deal with at the time, Deng Xiaoping and that faction, she trusted, and things went very well for a while. But what happened is that you've had Wan Xishan and what I think is basically a group of almost mob-like guys take over, and they're trying to totally redo the deal. I mean, what's happening in Hong Kong today was not what the deal was. The deal was supposed to be one country, two systems, right? And the system, the rule of law, and particularly Western commercial law, right? And people's freedom. And the reason that everybody agreed to that was the fact, in the turnover, was the fact that the Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese had a special sort of energy, right? That a special sort of entrepreneurial, it had, from a little island, you had made one of the great financial centers. You had Wall Street, you had the city of London, you had Tokyo, and you had Hong Kong. How did a little island like that with no resources do that? It was purely the grit, determination, and hard work, work style of the Hong Kong Chinese. That was what the whole deal was about. You wanted to keep that, first of all, you wanted to keep that to help China, to help mainland China, to be a capital market, to be a thing that Western capital could come through there, and knew that you had the rule of law, you had commercial, you had private property rights, and the people had freedom. I think one of the most inspiring things in the entire world today, two things, are the gilets jaunes, the yellow vest in France, the working class people, and the young kids that you see in Hong Kong. These young people that take to the streets and say, hey, look, I was raised, my grandparents came here, and we were raised to be free men and women. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to vote. We have the right of a First Amendment. We have the right to say what we want to do. We were not raised as slaves, and we're not prepared to become slaves. And I also think it's also the cowardice of the giant corporations and even the banks. Everybody in Hong Kong right now, all the power brokers are looking the other way. Everybody wants to pretend this is not happening. And to me, it's not acceptable. And I don't think it's acceptable to many people, free people in the world. You see Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese businessmen, that go to Hong Kong and just disappear. I will tell you something I would never think would happen in my adult life. Many people in the West love Hong Kong, and I've had so many people say, I'm afraid to go to Hong Kong. I don't know if I can go to Hong Kong because I see where they're taking Chinese entrepreneurs and they just disappear. This is only going to hurt not just Hong Kong, it's going to hurt the working men and women in China, because Hong Kong is really a conduit for capital to get in to help build the businesses and industries of China for the Chinese people. And what you're seeing, because the CCP is trying to exert control and trying to break a deal, that now you're seeing real fear being put into people. Yeah. I think you've seen in the past, I think there's been a real sea change in the United States government, and I'm very proud to have been a very small part of that. But I think under President Trump, and it's not just President Trump, I think people in China and Hong Kong realize this. It's really, I think the American people are becoming awakened, and I think that the U.S. government's now becoming awakened to the fact that the CCP has not been a good partner. The CCP has not been, they have lied to the people of Hong Kong, right? They're lying to the people in Taiwan. They're lying to the people in Southeast Asia. They're lying to the people in Australia, right? Their activities behind the dark of night of what they're doing is not what they purport to be, and not being a good partner. It's not what the Chinese government has been in the past, right? You know, China's got tremendous potential. As I say, it's got the greatest people in the world, right? But here you're seeing where just the lies, misrepresentations, and now what I think you're seeing doing is they're going in and actually taking people in a power struggle, and those people are disappearing. I think you're going to see the American people, right? The American people who have always had a deep love for the Chinese people. Remember, we were allies in World War II, right? Yeah. And I know so many stories from my father's generation, people I knew of people that went to India and flew over the Himalayas to send relief to China, General Stilwell in the army that fought in Burma to keep the China road open. You know, all the guys, and that story is becoming better and better known of the Chinese people working as great allies in World War II. And I think that people know that the Chinese people and the American people have been allies, but what's going on now, completely illegal, is just not acceptable. And I think you're seeing that. I think you're going to see the American people stand with the Chinese people, and particularly people in Hong Kong, that I don't think they're going to tolerate this going on. I think the one thing that people have to force, the little guy has to force, is the media companies and the big banks and the corporations who are all trying to play footsie. What they're trying to do is accommodate the CCP. One of the biggest problems we have in the West is the giant corporations, the big banks, and the media companies are afraid. And you see Google and Facebook, they're all afraid of the CCP. And they're afraid because they don't think they want to make money, right? So they're afraid of saying that this is wrong and this is not right. I believe you're seeing that this is changing every day. And I think it's going to have massive implications.